Minister and team, welcome to this quarterly hearing of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel. As usual, I'll just introduce the panel. So I'm Deputy Montfortadier, I chair this panel.
I'm Deputy Max Andrews.
Deputy Beatrice Morel, panel member.
Thank you. We've got apologies from Deputy Wilson, who can't be here today. Minister, would you just present your side of the table?
Of course. Deputy Kirsten, Morel, Minister for Sustainable Economic Development.
Richard Corrigan, Chief Officer, Department for the Economy.
Tom Holby, Chief Economic Advisor.
Heath Harvey, Head of Local Economy.
Thank you. We do know you, of course, but welcome back. It's nice to see you. This is, I think, our last hearing of the semester, so to speak, of the term, and so we hope it will be a good one. And so we've got lots of questions for you. I think you've had the question areas. One thing which is topical, which I hadn't necessarily put on the agenda, but which has happened in the last few days, was the incident of a fire on the Caesarea Trader, the FTS boat. Could you just talk to us about what you understood happened there, and if you've done any of your own initial inquiries as to what happened and what the consequences are?
So I don't know about the nature of the fire itself. But there was, as I understand it, a fire in the engine room when the trader was off the Isle of Wight, so it just left Portsmouth. That obviously, quite rightly, stopped it continuing. The most important thing was that crew and the one passenger on board were all safe and uninjured, which is the most important thing. And obviously, the trader was later taken back into port. That has had, obviously, implications on the supply chain. The Vinger, on the day of the incident itself, did a double rotation to try to ensure that there was as little disruption to the supply chain as possible, and the contingency vessel, the Arrow, was brought in to service and came into service on yesterday morning. Unfortunately, we also have high winds which are disrupting the supply chain further, but that's, nobody can account for that. That's what happens sometimes. So from my perspective, the important things were no injuries, first of all, maintaining the integrity of the supply chain, which looks like that's exactly what's happening. I would expect that the Marine Accident Investigation Board in the UK will do their investigations, and we look forward to finding out from them, what their views are as to how it happened. I mean, obviously, from my perspective as Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, I often see marine investigations from Jersey's role as a shipping registrar, and so I understand that process quite well. And it's very much always a fact-finding process to understand what happened, to try to make sure that for not just that vessel, but all vessels, if there are learning points that can be done to try to ensure that such things don't happen again. So I'd expect that to happen, but I don't have a timeline on that sort of investigation, because the MAIB has to operate on its own. So I don't know, just quickly, I don't know if Richard has any other information.
No, I don't know anything else at this stage, other than to say that the trader was due to go into dry dock anyway from tomorrow for a scheduled dry docking period, so she would have been coming off the routes and the Arrow coming on in any event. So hopefully, if there is repair work to be done, that would be done contemporaneous with whatever else was planned during the dry dock window. Yeah.
Was the dry dock scheduled work, or was it
scheduled work?
So the Arrow was coming in on service tomorrow, regardless. That was the plan. Yeah. She came in 2 days earlier than expected.
I mean, we won't use this hearing, but you'll be aware that we're about to publish and finalise a report on the concession agreement. But is there a concern more generally in your minds about maybe the age of some of the vessels and whether they're fit for purpose, or will you just wait and see what the result of the investigation is about this incident?
Without any information about how the incident took place, I can't speculate on that. I'm not particularly concerned about the age of the vessels, and part of that reason is because I know there's investment in new vessels, and so one way or another, again, with whichever provider we were to have chosen, we would have had older vessels. And that would always have been the case.
And there is interim investment in maintenance,
and
of course.
There is, exactly, and that's absolutely what the dry docking is about. The Levante jet's being refurbished. Yeah. She'll come back with a whole, more than a lick of paint. She'll come back very renewed.
So, Minister, to be even-handed, we did have your colleague, Deputy Gorst, Minister for External Relations and Financial Services, in yesterday. I gave him the opportunity to talk in some general terms. I don't want you to expound for a very long time, but could you talk to us about what some of the things that you're pleased that you've been able to achieve during this term, and I will also ask about what you think are the areas that have either you've not been able to get across the line, or that work that still need to be done, or any difficulties you've had.
Yes, so thank you. So I think actually a piece of work which started under my predecessor, Deputy Farnham, and I continued and we published in 2023 was the Future Economy Programme. And I think that's fundamentally probably the most important piece of work that the department has done in the last few years. It's, to my knowledge, the first time Jersey's had an overall economic kind of policy and economic strategy. But the reason it's so important is because it not only brought to the island's attention the challenges faced by a demographic change as we get older, as the population gets older overall, but it also has got people talking about this in a way that they weren't before. And actually we see this in things like, there's the Island of Longevity Conference 2-3 years ago that wasn't being talked about, now it is. So I think the Future Economy Programme sets the scene really well for whoever future governments are, whatever their kind of leanings politically, etc., etc. The Future Economy Programme enables any government of any political persuasion to operate within that framework with their own policies, but it helps focus on what we need to do in order to have an economy that thrives during a challenging period as the population gets older. So I think that's probably the real fundamental and the thing that I think is the most important thing. Beyond that, I'm very proud of the fact that we now have over 100 farmers in farming, whereas we had 40 when I came in. I'm really pleased with the work that we've done in kind of reinvigorating after, I think, quite a few years of not really engaging with the regions of Normandy and Brittany, except on a kind of annual basis when the summits came round. I'm really proud of the fact that our department is now engaging with Normandy and Brittany on a constant and regular basis. I think that's really important, and we're building those relations.
Yeah. What form does that interaction take? What forms of interactions? Yeah. Yeah,
all sorts of forms. So we have things like the Brittany and Normandy summits, which are very formal, very good and very useful. But they also take interactions all the way down to individual projects that we work together on. So obviously, from the Morel Express and those Norman Sea connections that we have, I led and worked with the president of La Manche to kind of engage and say that Jersey will help with the support in those vessels. Guernsey then followed, which I was really delighted with. That was really pleasing. And so those, I went recently, so that I think you'd appreciate, Chair, that relationships are not just the formal side, they're also the informal side. And so it's things like I went to the president of La Manche being inducted into the Légion d'honneur. I went to, with my own back to see that, to engage with that. I'm in kind of telephone and text message conversation with regional leaders in both Brittany and Normandy at that individual level. Yeah. But it highlights, and it's something I know I've said to you in the past, the thing I worry about is the continuity of that as the political cycles change. And I think we need to find a mechanism in the states of Jersey and the government of Jersey for ensuring that just because one person's no longer the minister or is no longer in the states, those relationships don't drift and drain away. I think you'd probably appreciate that that's an important thing.
Thank you. So, Minister, if we turn to maybe some of the challenges or work that you think is still to be done, and if you don't mind me asking, has the relationship with Ille-Vilaine and St. Malo, has that become slightly more difficult given that there's still potentially some unresolved issues or some questions around access to ramps for DFDS, etc.?
No, I've got to admit it hasn't. I was worried that it would, and this is why there's been some narrative somewhere that Jersey had a predetermined outcome to its tender process. It's absolute rubbish, that narrative. As someone who has worked personally incredibly hard on our relationships with Brittany, particularly, and Normandy, is I did not want to harm them, and I would not want to harm them. The decision, therefore the easy decision would have been to make the decision which would look like it would keep those relationships more easily intact. I'm really pleased that my interaction with Brittany in particular has been, since then, has been very much business as usual. It hasn't been tainted in that way. I am in that informal way of communicating with my counterparts in the region. And yeah, I've got to admit, there is in some areas, certainly around St Malo, a view that they needed competition to come in, and they didn't want to see a monopoly on all ferries in St Malo as well. And so there are definitely people who have an opinion that having that competitive element is really useful to the town. I think there is still, when I came into office, there wasn't much in the way of relationships with Ille itself, the department, in the way that we have really strong relationships with La Manche. I think there is still some way to go on that. They haven't been, I'd say that's been the slowest part of our kind of French relations development. It's nothing to do with the ferries. It's just that's an area I'd like to see concentrated on in the future.
Thank you. Minister, we're going to turn now to some specific questions around, initially around alcohol licensing. So just for the context, I suppose, for those listening, is that we know that you brought the alcohol licensing to the States, and it was adopted in the first reading on the 22nd of January, and then it's been part, so to speak, and we noticed that there have been a number of amendments come forward, yes, including one by yourself a couple of days ago, or yesterday. That's right. Which I've taken the time to read. Thank you. Could we ask you about that initially? So I think it's fair to say that there's one quite big amendment, which is you've decided no longer to give the regulation to the Gambling Commission, but you've decided effectively to do, can we say it in-house? Yes, with the
yes, in-house would be an appropriate in-house within government.
Yes. Could you talk to us exactly about the responsibility that the Regulation Directorate will have? Yeah. Tell us who they are, because I think we know, but not everyone knows, and how you came to that decision.
So the amendment, you're absolutely right, Chair. The amendment removes the Alcohol and Gambling Commission from the proposed law and replaces it with the Regulatory Directorate. The Regulatory Directorate is an existing department within government, and it oversees regulation in a number of areas, everything from planning, the planning system. So the Regulatory Director runs that planning system, all the way through to kind of the tourism rules around tourism and regulating them. And beach parking permits, etc. They do that as well. As well as trading standards. So they do a wide and much more. They do a wide range of regulatory work already for the government. It was clear from speaking to states members and also within the debate itself that there was significant resistance to using the Alcohol and Gambling Commission or creating the Alcohol and Gambling Commission. I'm not convinced that all of that was appropriate criticism, but it was criticism nonetheless. And I think there were some very strong views on that. That's what I picked up. So in the way I work is when I think there is, significant resistance and actually maybe that won't work as far as the States Assembly is concerned, I think it's right to look for alternatives. And actually you can see that in, an alternative view has been proposed by Deputy Balash as well. So he was looking for alternatives. But the Regulatory Directorate, having spoken around with a number of states members, I think states members are in the main more comfortable with that. The Regulatory Director already does a large amount of the work on behalf of the Licensing Assembly, so they are doing a lot of that work already.
Remind us where the regulatory body sits.
In the Environment and Planning Department.
Yeah. Is that going to be problematic in any way in terms of, I suppose, just the future oversight? So I'm thinking also for a future scrutiny panel, it won't necessarily just be our scrutiny panel. That may be the environment scrutiny panel, but of course the legislation does emit from your department. Is that?
So the policy would, yes, the policy function, which I think is the main bit for scrutiny, would still be sitting within the Economy Department and would obviously, as the proposal suggests, would ultimately be overseen by this kind of ministerial group, which includes the police and others. So the Connotabs and others as well. So the policy bit still sits here on the economy side, and really, which is appropriate because there would need to be a separation. This is what you do need, is a separation from those creating the policies and those administering those policies. There should be a separation from that. And so I think it should work. I don't think you would expect any scrutiny panel to be particularly sitting with a minister, in this case the Environment Minister, and saying, why didn't you give a licence to so-and-so?
Yeah.
Why did you give a licence to so-and-so?
Yes.
That wouldn't be appropriate in any situation, I don't think. So the scrutiny would still be with the Economic Development Minister, and that would be very much around the policy setting.
So I think we'd asked you previously, and I can't remember in what context, about why you'd proposed initially to put it with the Gambling Commission to extend their powers, and I think you said that the industry was more content with it being with an arm's length body than with it being done in-house. Have you managed to speak to the hospitality?
Not the Hospitality Association, though I've let them know, but I haven't had a conversation. I have had a conversation with the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce are happy with this. I believe as well, actually, I was speaking to the chair of the the CEO of the Hospitality Association yesterday. This didn't come up, and that was, I didn't intend not to bring it up. It just didn't happen in a conversation. That in itself suggests, I'm happy to be corrected by the CEO, but it suggests to me that it wasn't top of his mind as a concern, that it's the regulatory director, but I haven't had that conversation with them. The Chamber of Commerce were relaxed. They felt that the most important thing was they wanted to see the law get through, and if that means, moving to the regulatory director, enable states members to vote for it, then they're very much behind that.
One of the things, I think that was mentioned in the report, was about the Gambling Commission having the expertise and the background with alcohol. So is that one of the reasons originally why you decided that actually this may be the right body to...
It felt very, I still think it would have been a good place to put it. I think that arm's length nature is helpful, because people can be suspicious of government, rightly or wrongly, but people can have those suspicions. And, because of the Gambling Commission operates in an area where it already licenses businesses to undertake various activities, so it would be doing a similar thing there. But also the current personnel, and I don't like making a decision based on current personnel, because personnel change, so you should always be looking at the system. But it is correct that the current personnel do have experience in areas like licensing. I know the current chair, but he would be leaving at the end of the year anyway. But the current chair has been on the licensing assembly in the past. The current CEO has been on the police authority, and so so good relationships with the police, etc. Things like this. It felt like a very good fit. But I understand, there are political realities that you have to deal with, and I think the regulatory directorate is aimed at dealing with those political realities, and I think they can do a good job too.
And do you think with the regulation directorate they have enough resource to meet the demand as well?
Yes, they are absolutely, and in fact you can argue that they would be pleased. And I've had zero lobbying from the Environment and Planning Department, none whatsoever. No. But ultimately, the fees which are currently paid to them would stay in that department. So actually, their resources are improved, because previously the department was going to, under the Alcohol and Gambling Commission proposal, was going to lose £260,000 of fee income.
I see.
That will remain there now. But I have to say, that is absolutely nothing to do with the decision. No. And I've not spoken to any officer or any minister from that area about the fees staying there. It's just, I know from their perspective, I imagine they're pleased with that, is all I'm saying.
And I imagine you've also probably spoken to the Environment Minister about the proposed change before it was then formally introduced.
Yes, we had a brief conversation, and he was very pleased with that outcome, but it wasn't a conversation in advance in the sense of, I'm losing money from my budget, can we change this? None of that has ever happened.
Okay, thank you.
And he was actually very supportive. I remember one council ministers meeting where he was extremely supportive of the Alcohol and Gambling Commission. He really wants the law to go through.
So, Minister, do you think that as a result of this, your amendment will the council committee's amendment fall?
I don't know that. I actually met the committee on another matter earlier this week, and we briefly discussed the alcohol licensing proposal. I don't know. I have had nothing from the committee about them removing their...
So it wasn't done as an agreement?
No, absolutely not. There's no conversation like that has taken place.
One thing we've... I think the panel at the moment is neutral on what you're proposing. I think it is something we questioned about whether it could be done in-house. it is quite a fundamental shift from what you were originally proposing. It's not an inconsequential amendment.
It's not inconsequential. I wouldn't call it fundamental, but I wouldn't say it's inconsequential.
I mean, there's a lot in the law which I think we all agree is, probably all agree that needs to be done. I think in terms of who regulates it is quite significant, and we're wondering if this is something that you feel that you have to have debated in 12 days' time, or whether it is something that could wait till the March sitting, which would certainly give us time to do more formal questioning and to provide some more detailed scrutiny around. You don't have to answer that now, but that's something which you may want to have conversations with other states members and decide.
I think if my main aim, Chair, is to get this debated this side of the elections.
Yeah.
So as long as there are assurances about not dragging that out further, then I am.
I mean, I think for our part, I mean, this is a public hearing, and obviously I think this can't be necessarily called in at this point, but I think we would like to do a job of scrutiny now with there's greater clarity about what the options are, and we would envisage that that could be done. I'd have thought certainly for a March sitting.
Obviously, my preference would be the earlier of the 2 March sittings, if possible.
I think it's safer.
But
But we'll leave that to be discussed. I think.
My initial instinct, caveat that with, I'm happy to change my instincts, but is I don't have a deep problem with that.
No.
Can I just one final question around this? We note that the draft law still requires that every application should go to the constable of the parish concerned for parish assembly to decide whether or not to recommend the commission, or it won't be the commission anymore, but that the licence should be granted. Are you still minded to keep that? And
I'm very relaxed on that part. I set out to say at the beginning that we don't want to change the role of the parishes. And because I think it's important that those impacted at a local level are able to have their say. I still think the better option was the original drafting, which was that the Connétable could choose to waive a parish assembly if they felt that was there. Because I felt it gives them an option which they previously didn't have. So, if you were to look at the legislation, I would encourage you to look at that part and have your own thoughts on that as well, because I would be happy to change it back to
we have had
an
some
option, but
we have had some feedback from, I think we as states members have had feedback from those in the industry saying that they want a streamlined and they want to cut red tape, and it seems that having to automatically go to a parish assembly for something that might be uncontroversial, and that may span different parishes, it could arguably be seen as unnecessary. But
and that's why I think it'd be good for you to potentially examine that question.
Okay. Anyone else got questions on our part at the moment? No. Thank you. Right, we'll move on. So the next section I'd like us to go to would be section 33. For us, called question 33, which Deputy Porre will lead on. So this, just to give context before Deputy Porre starts, this relates to the repeal of the draft shops regulation of opening and delivery times, P40. Again, this has recently been lodged, so we haven't had a chance to look at it in depth, but I think we'd welcome you talking to that most.
Yes, thank you, Minister. Could you just start by giving us an overview of this particular draft law?
Yeah. So this was the subject of my conversation with the committee on Monday. So, yes, this is, in short, it's a repeal of the shops regulation of opening and deliveries Jersey law. It is aimed squarely at the kind of removing red tape element of my portfolio and the work that I've been trying to do. And it literally, in simple terms, just takes away that shop openings law. So shops, it's only retail is covered by that law. So, I know there have been, for instance, delivery issues at St. Peter's Technical Park. There's been some neighbours who aren't happy, with the noise that's created at different times of day and night. This law has never covered an area like St. Peter's Technical Park. So the repeal of this law would not in any way impact that sort of dispute and concern. This is solely about retail areas. I think it's a law which in itself requires currently a shop to go to the parish the Connétable to get a permit to open on a Sunday, and it kind of, in giving that permit, the Connétable is able to set restrictions around the times of deliveries. In my view, the deliveries are probably the most, in today's world, are probably the most contentious area. You know, should they be regulated or not? We've worked with the Chamber of Commerce because I think this is a good example of where, as I said at the speech in Chamber of Commerce, we can replace regulation at a government level, so law, by working with industry to regulate themselves. And so the Chamber of Commerce have drawn up a code of conduct, not just for their members, but for all people working with, you know, wanting to open on a Sunday, have deliveries at certain times on a Sunday, and they would be seeking for people to sign up to work to that to that code of conduct. I think, therefore, it is a good, if this was to go through, I think it's a really good way of seeing how, you know, can we work in this kind of self-regulatory manner. Yes. There are some realities around deliveries. You know, the boat arrives at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, so you're not going to get deliveries before kind of 7 a.m. on any Sunday anyway. And, you know, even today, if the boat, due to weather, is delayed, and so it arrives mid-afternoon, let's say, you know, the deliveries even now would on those individual occasions happen in the afternoon and things like that. So I think it's a way that we can give islanders comfort that they will not have their Sundays disturbed, and at the same time engage industry through, in this case, the Chamber of Commerce, to show to the island that they can kind of regulate themselves and make sure that they are operating in a cohesive manner with the society in Jersey. So in short, that's it. I think it's worth trying. It would be up for debate. It could be contentious. I don't think so. I got good feedback from the committee. Not 100% of the constables are in agreement, but I got a majority feedback, I'd say, from the committee that they were supportive, which is...
Just in terms of clarity, when you do say that this particular draft law will only affect retail shops, we know majority of shops are in St Helier, but are you actually meaning, say, places such as Ballards, the precinct, you know, St John's, again, the shopping precinct, so would
all
they
retail shops in Jersey.
All the shops in Jersey? Yeah. And again, just for clarity, that will, in your idea, that will only that will be a privilege of the shop owner to choose to open on Sundays or not. Yes. And to choose, that would mean applying for the license.
So they would not need to apply for a license anymore. They would just, it would be up to the shop owner themselves to decide whether or not to open on a Sunday and what hours to open on that Sunday.
Thank you.
So there would be no license anymore. At the moment, they have to apply for a permit. Okay. They would no longer have to apply for a permit.
Thank you for that clarity. So what evidence or analysis, informed analysis, have you got of the existing Sunday opening permit system? How did you do a study? Have you kind of been looking at the businesses who are asking you for more flexibility on those type of opening hours? Is that where is your evidence coming from in relaxing this particular law?
So there are a couple of things. So I think one reason, you know, one kind of political driver in my mind for this sort of law, there is obviously just trying to remove what you could say is unnecessary regulation. Obviously, the world has changed a lot, and so people are much more comfortable with shopping on a Sunday. And in fact, surveys have shown that people, particularly young people in Jersey, do feel they should be able to go shopping on a Sunday more easily. When we engage with parishes, and obviously, Deputy, you're absolutely correct, the majority of retail outlets are in St Helier. When we engage with parishes, parish, and I believe this is St Helier particularly, acknowledge that permits are routinely granted. So that's that sense of why are we having to take, you know, why are we forcing shop owners to go to get a permit when that permit will basically be handed out regardless?
There's a cost to that as well.
There is a cost.
What is the cost to apply?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, to be honest. But so there is a cost to business to apply for that permit. And again, our engagement with the parish has suggested that actually the parish believes they make a kind of net loss So the money they take in through administrative fees for the permit is less than the money they spend on administering the system. So there's, from that perspective, there's no, in fact, the parish should gain because they should no longer lose money on the system, which apparently loses their money.
Minister, can I ask, you mentioned that there was a bit of opposition with some of the connotabs, and I just wanted to know, why would they be opposed to you bringing forward this repeal?
So I think the biggest concerns are around deliveries.
Yeah.
Because I think deliveries are where, if there's going to be a noise issue, deliveries are the ones most likely to create noise. Obviously, deliveries, as I said, boat arrives at 6, deliveries are happening at 7 or 8 a.m.
Yeah.
You know, cages rattle, reversing lorries beep. If, you know, some of our big retail outlets, our supermarkets are surrounded by residential.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the main concern lies. And I fully understand that. That's why, you know, we're working with the Chamber of Commerce to see, actually, is this something that you guys can regulate yourselves? Yeah. Interestingly as well, there are technological breakthroughs. So something I'm pleased to have learned, and some supermarkets in Jersey or some are already adopting this. You can now get those cages, which you put all your boxes in and they rattle and make a big noise. They're now being designed in a way where they're vastly quieter. So the wheels don't make the noise and it doesn't rattle and shake. And I know that some shops, particularly supermarkets, are adopting that in Jersey, which in itself will make the whole delivery process quieter. The Chamber of Commerce, you know, Code of Conduct as currently drafted, and I actually suggested some changes, so there'll be a new draft which I think will be published. Would you know, says no deliveries before 7 a.m. and that's currently the regime we live under already. So and the other side of it, I can't remember if I said this, was, you know, I have gone to St Malo, like all of us have, many times, and seen how on a Sunday, particularly in the summer, the town is alive, the shops are all open. And I've often, I said it to Scrutiny before, I've often been in St Helier on a Sunday, seen that the vast majority of shops are shut, and that when people come here for a day trip, particularly for the day trip, they've got one day to enjoy St Helier, but actually the shops are shut on a Sunday. And so I'm really keen to see St Helier be more open on Sundays. And I think in the summer ahead, we are going to see some of the big department stores open on select Sundays during the summer, and I think that's going to be a great help to encouraging more Sunday shopping, more Sunday opening, I should say, in town. So I think that's something we do lack at the moment.
Yeah.
Could I just quickly ask a technical question about, so the law is repealing to a law and regulations. So you've got the shops regulation of opening and deliveries, Jersey law, and then you've got the regulations. Those two are tied together, presumably, are they? Is it the regulations that inform the law?
That's correct. So all of that would fall away. It's not a big law.
And another question is, does this apply to currently to the big shops, as we might say, that open on a Sunday, can only open between 10 and 4? Will they now have carte blanche to open whenever they want on a Sunday?
They would be able to open when they want.
Without a permit?
Without a permit, that's correct. They would. It would, because it would take away, for retail premises only, it would take away all legislation restricting their openings on the Sunday. Okay. I think there are hard realities around opening on a Sunday, you know, in the sense that businesses won't open at times when they're not going to get customers. So you're not going to see a big supermarket opening at 6 a.m. On Sunday, because they know they're not going to get customers, and they'd be having to pay their staff a lot more as well. So I think this is the other part of it. There are natural restrictions in business operations, which mean that they aren't going to be opening at kind of 11 o'clock at night and things like this.
What it does mean, I presume, is that say if Waitrose or the big co-op, as we might call it, are opening, say, from 8 till 8 on a Sunday, or 8, that means more alcohol can be sold later on into the day and on Sunday or earlier in the morning. Has any consultation been done around that with the committee, or with even off licenses who might potentially see less trade?
No, it hasn't been raised at any point. I've got to admit, that specific point hasn't been discussed.
Yeah, that was
to the best of my knowledge.
Part of one of the questions we intended to ask you was about the wider impact assessment. If that has taken place at all. So, for instance, things like economic impact, workforce impact. You have spoken in a few occasions about the community impact, maybe mostly in terms of noise making and how not to disturb people during their Sunday. So, but has any been any wider impact assessment done on this particular repeal law that you could or you would like to comment on?
So we haven't done an economic impact, I think, and I'll happily have Tom, talk to that in a sec. But I think it's something that would be extremely difficult to do an economic impact on. We know that today many shops, including certain supermarkets, do open on Sundays. So in terms of displacement from the on-licensed trade, pubs and hotels, etc., my personal view is I don't think you'd see very much impact. If I want to buy some wine on a Sunday, I can in an off-license, in a retail premise, I can very easily buy wine on a Sunday today. I'm not, I don't have to go to a pub or a hotel to get a bottle of wine on a Sunday. So I think because we have liberalised, I think it was in my first term of office, we did liberalise the Sunday trading laws, and it became much easier to do a 10 till 4 permit. You can go shopping today, but what with for your alcohol, etc., I can buy it from my local garage, on the Sunday today. So I don't think you're going to see any displacement. But as far as the ability to create these analyses, I think my view is that there'd be an enormous amount of work and cost without very much outcome, because I think it'd be very hard to get that information. But Tom might speak to that.
I would expect the impact to be very low as well, just thinking it through in terms of what would happen. You've got a very short period of time, extension from 4 till whatever a supermarket decides to open to, let's say 7. You would be talking about a small amount of displacement in alcohol or any other type of grocery from a select few. Those shops are generally open for convenience purposes. That convenience doesn't disappear just because something else is open. Opening times are part of convenience, but locality is much closer to, much more important for convenience. So that displacement would be very low, I would expect, between 4 and 7, let's just say that as the example. So any economic impact would probably be highly limited, and probably less than the time taken for me to actually go through the entire issue. So I don't think it would be proportionate to do one, but I would be happy to give a very quick piece of advice, which I suppose I just have, that I would expect it to be very limited impact.
I mean, in a way, we could say that our shopping habits have changed with the introduction of online shopping. Some of us shop whatever time of the day, but obviously we're looking specifically on how it affects other people. So thank you for that. Another question is, has the government assessed whether the repeal may impact working patterns, staff welfare or employment rights within the retail sector?
So it doesn't affect employment rights. This has no impact on employment law. So employment rights are fully maintained. Shops,
and that has been checked?
I don't think we've had to. I know it doesn't impact employment law. And it, from the perspective of opening, one of the reasons many shops don't open at the moment is because it is difficult for them to get staff, etc. We don't have lots of staff in Jersey, and so that would still be a restriction. So if I own a shop and I can't find the staff to open it on a Sunday, then I won't be able to open on a Sunday. That doesn't change. Again, I don't know if there's any particular...
No, that's accurate. It doesn't cut across employment rights. Employers would still have to enter into appropriate contracts with staff to have them working either extended hours on a Sunday, because they're extending their trading hours, or to start trading on a Sunday from maybe a 6-day-a-week pattern.
And they would have to define their working hours in the way that they have to define their working hours under.
So the agreement will take place between employer and employee.
Yes.
I mean, has any consultation been done with the trade unions on this? No, it hasn't.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I mean, it's a small law. We haven't done lots of consultation. From my perspective, it's one of those things. I think this will help Jersey's economy. I think it will help town, particularly in the summer. Yeah. I think it's a piece of law which doesn't do very much today. As I said, if I, as a shop in St Helier, want to get a Sunday trading permit, it will be issued to me, no questions asked.
If you thought there was a pushback on a certain area, so for example, I could possibly envisage some pushback. Certainly in the past, we've seen it about the big shops, les grandes surfaces, as they say in France, and I know it varies from region, but in certainly in Brittany, Normandy, they tend to be open from 8 till 12 on a Sunday only. And I don't know if that's to do with regional laws or if it's just the commercial practice, but if the aim is to keep the town centre vibrant, then would that be something you consider differentiating?
And we could do, that would mean keeping the law in place. Or we could differentiate through the code of conduct with the Chamber of Commerce.
And so the other question was then, did you ever consider amending the law rather than repealing it?
We did have discussions about it. I felt that a repeal would be the easiest way. And I'm also interested in seeing what the states do think about it. This isn't, Jersey's economy won't be saved in any way by this, if you know what I mean. I think it's a piece of law which isn't serving much purpose today. And therefore, my view is, let's get rid of it. We could find that there are benefits to getting rid of it. I am interested in seeing what the states think. If the states felt otherwise, then so be it. That's the way it is.
So if the law is adopted, Minister, what is the expected timeline for it to be commencing?
The law isn't being adopted, it's taking away a law. So I believe it would be relatively fast.
Sorry, that's word.
Yeah. So I don't know the exact timeline. I'm not sure whether there's a week or whether it has to go in some way to Privy Council. The law would have to be rescinded from the court registers. But I think we're talking weeks.
Okay.
Rather than anything else, it would be fast because it's not putting in a law, it's taking away a law.
Okay. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. I think we're going to move on to Deputy Andrews, who will ask about the economic outlook and growth. If that's okay, and we'll find ourselves on page 44.
44. Yes. Minister, obviously you've been in post twice, essentially this term. I just wanted to know, obviously with you coming to the end of your term, what is the outlook looking like for Jersey's economy?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I know we had the very limited IOD survey recently, which said, businesses are concerned, business owners, business leaders are concerned about the outlook for the economy. But at the same time, individually, they said they were happy with the outlook for their individual businesses. So it is interesting. I think there is, because of the global turbulence, I think there is a general sense that things are out of control globally. Yeah. And I think that feeds into a negative outlook on the economy. And I was just saying earlier, we tend to favour the things that we can control. And if I'm a business owner, I can control my business. Yeah. I can't control the economy or the global kind of geopolitics. And so I think it would be natural to say the bit I control, I feel confident about. All the rest of it, which I don't control, I don't feel confident about. No. That's kind of my analysis of that perspective. I think where we are today, we're in a stronger position than we were 4 years ago. I think we're coming out the back of COVID. I think it's really interesting that I think it feels like we've forgotten about COVID and its impacts quite quickly. But the challenges we've had in tourism, I think in large part have been COVID's long tail, if you know what I mean. As part of that, we've had enormous issues with supply chains around the world, and that feeds into that difficulty and that price rising which we see going on. So I think where we are economically, we're in a better position than where we were before. I think we've still got a fundamentally strong financial services sector. I think we're seeing the hospitality economy growing. I think we're seeing new businesses opening up in that area. And in the year ahead, I think we're going to see more tourists than we had last year. And in fact, it's quite possible we might see the most tourists we've had since 2019. So I think we're going to have strong in that area. The area of the economy, which I think is of most concern to islanders and myself, is around cost of living. And I think that's something which the government in Jersey doesn't have many tools around. No. And I think it's something that we need to constantly be looking at, and where we can, how can we help this element. At the same time, I was very pleased to see that the inflation rate has somewhat stabilised. It was 2.8% at the last just last month when those figures came out. And a lot of that is in housing. So the cost of housing, both renting and buying, has reduced significantly. Government policy has helped with that. The stamp duty, which was a manifesto commitment on my part, I'll be pleased to say, the stamp duty levy on second purchases absolutely has had an impact on the cost of housing.
Yeah.
I am of the view that that was always there to be a proxy for interest rates. So 0% interest rates were terrible for Jersey because they created a housing bubble. The extra stamp duty was there as a proxy for interest rates and therefore was always meant to be temporary. We brought it down by 1% this year. I think that was appropriate. I think we need to continue bearing down on that because one of the unintended but expected consequences of that is that by having fewer people buying a house for investment, it's harder to get projects off the ground because they want to sell 25% or 50% before they start building a project. And so it has that impact on the construction sector, which then brings me to the construction sector. That is still an area that I am concerned about. There is a downturn in activity in the construction sector. I think government does have a large part to play in that. We do need to get projects. The Investing in Jersey programme that Chief Minister has announced, I think, is a good answer to that. You know, with the hospital coming on, the Fort Regent being done, South Hill being done, and various other projects, actually, I think that will drive a lot of work into the construction sector and stop the kind of downturn that we've seen there coming up. I can go on for a long time. I wondered if the Chief Economic Advisor might have a view as to where we are.
But in terms of, say, the feedback that you've received yourself as Minister for Sustainable Development, what do you think has to be prioritised going into next term for whoever is going to be responsible for being the new, it could be yourself, in fact, being the new Minister for Sustainable Development to try and enable businesses and also to try and increase growth within the economy as well?
So I think what we need to prioritise is to maintain our investment in infrastructure. I'm very critical of the last 30 years of failing to invest in infrastructure and maintaining infrastructure. I think that's absolutely vital. I think we need to continue to make it very clear that Jersey has an open and competitive business environment. I do worry when I hear some political views around the idea of kind of restricting you know, even taking things back to monopolies and things like this. And you know, when you've already got take telecoms, for instance, you've already got a really good competitive marketplace. Leave it as a very competitive marketplace. It needs to stay in that way. So
who's suggesting that?
I would never divulge anything like that.
I just saying that there should be.
This is kind of people talking, if you know what I mean. But so I think we have to remain open, and we also, I think, need to have a greater focus on inward investment. I think that's somewhere where I have been pushing since day one. Inward investment isn't about, in my mind, isn't about someone just coming to Jersey to open a shop.
No.
That's just someone coming to Jersey to open a shop. Inward investment is about businesses moving to Jersey, engaging and investing in the island, either to build premises or hire several staff, bring plant and equipment to the island and building up that way. So again, you know, hotels, a really good way for us to engage inward investment. Ports coming, hopefully, they'll be announcing in coming months, hopefully they'll get a successful tender out on La Folly, and you'll potentially see a hotel at La Folly. That would likely have an international business investing in Jersey to do that, and we'll see that elsewhere. But I still think there are areas that we can be faster on. I think medtech is an area where we've seen real excitement, some really committed people, but on the regulatory side, we are still moving too slowly. So Jersey needs, so we've got medtech businesses in Jersey, but we need the regulatory side to be in place in order for them to be able to work. That needs to happen fast. It's not happening fast enough.
You also mentioned about inward investment, and I just really want to kind of probe and ask a further question about, do you believe there is maybe a shortfall of investment locally, and therefore there's a need to try and then focus on getting more inward investment to make up that shortfall?
So Jersey, actually, this goes back to ministerial achievements, actually. Jersey is, and I was informed this by the Chief Economic Advisor in the past, Jersey has a low rate of business reinvestment. That is something which is a big problem for the island, and it's one of the things that we can see in non-public, but infrastructure, which isn't public infrastructure, it's private infrastructure, but it's not being invested in and maintained, and we can see that as well.
And why do you think that is?
I don't know is the answer, but that's where, go back to ministerial achievements, the Better Business Support Scheme was designed to absolutely drive, impact in that area. And so we have triggered investment through that scheme. I think that's been a huge success. I was speaking to someone this morning who was really pleased with that scheme and how they've used it to invest in their business. And so I do think that we need to find ways to maintain something to stimulate investment. It could be the same scheme or it could be a different scheme, but I think the next minister should be looking to maintain stimulus. Might not even be financial stimulus, it could be something else that I've not thought of, but maintain a way of stimulating Jersey businesses to reinvest in themselves. That is vital for the future.
Minister, with that, can we push you on whether the Better Business package will continue under the rest of your term? Are you going to take steps to?
Certainly for the rest of my term now, yes. If I was to be re-elected as Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, I would seek to continue it in some form or seek other ways of stimulating business reinvestment.
Would you amend it in any way? Are there parts that, it's the skills section, maybe something that needs to be rethought?
I think it probably does. And yes, I am always open to changing, amending. You learn from experience and you adjust accordingly. That is something that I'd absolutely, across the board, including the productivity grants, I'd be happy to look at all parts.
I suppose, and feel free to let your officers join in, but if it's appropriate. But is there a case that this was the Better Business package seen as being a temporary solution to stimulate, or is it? If it is something that's going to be more permanent, at what point does it become a crutch to industry potentially?
That's always the problem with providing public money to help businesses, because it can become a crutch. And so in that sense, it could also be something that happens intermittently to avoid that precise thing happening. I think any subsidy, sometimes you need the crutch to be there permanently. So the Rural and Marine Support Scheme, that's a permanent crutch. I fundamentally believe Jersey farms and marine businesses cannot operate without that subsidy when they're competing against subsidised businesses.
Is there an argument?
Business reinvestment, you might want it to be intermittent.
I think people are glad when they see results, but there is an argument that some might say, look, Jersey businesses generally don't pay tax for a start, therefore they should have more money in the first place to reinvest in their own businesses. Is it a question of getting the message out saying, if you do put some of your profits back into your business, if they exist, then ultimately that's better for you. Then how do we do that?
I think there is an education. I think it's always worth saying it. Tom,
so I think part of it is actually increasing the culture of investment in businesses themselves, which is why it's a 50-50 match funded as well. In terms of it being a crutch, it's not a subsidy. It is an investment in capital and in skills. It was designed to be a short-term thing to deal with the transition to living wage as well, and take advantage of the increase in labour costs to ensure that businesses can try and be more efficient and productive by shifting to capital and upskilling the labour at the same time. So it was purposely designed in that way to be a short-term package. However, if we are seeing good results from it, it might be something we want to evaluate and look into the future to try and shift that culture, which is what you're talking about, of investment in businesses. Our investment levels are very low. I think it is one of the big things that we need to be talking about in the next assembly period. We've, I think, landed the message of the ageing population and requirement for productivity very well over the last 3 or 4 years. I think we now need to do a lot more about what that means. I think investment is a big part of that. Our investment levels are very low. And also productivity means in terms of labour rather than profits as well. And it's ensuring that we optimise labour. So we've always talked about this in-house. Maybe we haven't got those next 2 messages to land quite as well as what we would like to do. So I think that's the sort of forward look of it.
There's another thing, if I may, Chair, very quickly. I think there's another concern, which is public investment in the economy. If you take away the COVID period, where obviously government, through the payroll support scheme, invested hundreds of millions of pounds in the economy to keep people employed. Outside of that, Jersey as a government has a very low economic investment rate. So I think, the COFOG, our colleague, Deputy Ward, Rob Ward, brought this proposition about the classification of functions of government. And when you look at those reports, you see that Jersey, in fact, I think more recently, Jersey's kind of COFOG economic investment was about 1% of either GDP or government taxation, government income. The UK is something like 4%, Luxembourg 7%. Jersey's down at kind of 1 point something percent. So I do worry that speak to Deputy Andrews, what would the next minister be focusing on? We have to keep focusing on the productivity increases and growing our economy. The next minister must focus on that. And part of that is the government itself finding ways to invest in the economy. I worry that we are being drawn into just funding services, whether it's health or education. And obviously we do need to fund those things, but you provide the money to fund those things by having a larger economy. If the economy isn't growing, you will have less money to go into health and education. And I do worry that there's sometimes a narrative against the economy, almost as though, the economy will sort itself out.
There is a windfall coming, if we can call it that, with the Pillar 2 tax receipts projected
Yes,
at
it's
50
still
million.
uncertain.
But I presume that they've been spent many times over the different...
We're taking quite a prudent approach to it to date, in terms of a hierarchy of how that Pillar 2 would be used, and in terms of forecasting what would be expected for Pillar 2 as well, using a very prudent approach in terms of companies that we know are on the island rather than companies that might not be paying tax here. So I think the approach that's been taken has been prudent. There is a hierarchy of spending. I think at the moment that puts us in a good place rather than building it into our base budgets, which we haven't done, because we don't know how this will play out over 2 or 3 years, particularly with the turbulence there is at the moment. So we wouldn't want to do that until year 3, 4, where you do know that tax is part of your tax base now.
I mean, it's a problem, isn't it? If we are still a low tax place and corporate tax is only selective on certain companies, and I think that companies also want investment in public services, so good education systems, good roads, presumably good connectivity. So I suppose that there is a wider context about how investment can come. Deputy Andrews, should I take over?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's fine.
Just to the last part of this, as we move into maybe talk about the Future Economy programme more generally. Yesterday we had the External Relations Minister in, and he, somewhat unexpectedly, we asked a question and we received an answer about remote working and whether consideration was being given to people living in one place but being able to work in another. So it could be people working in the north of England or in Ille-et-Vilaine or in Normandy, but living there and then working in Jersey either remotely or physically. And whether there'd be questions about taxation, social security payments, which are being looked at. We were told that there is work going on in that area. I don't know if you're aware of that or whether you think that's potentially an interesting area for both helping with the employment situation, but also not necessarily increasing the population.
I think remote working provides so many things, challenges and opportunities. So the challenge is you can be working for Jersey or a Jersey company, but living the other side of the world and therefore not paying tax, as you said. But equally, the opportunity is if I'm a Jersey business, I can now more easily get clients from the other side of the world in a way that I couldn't do before. So I think it provides the opportunity for Jersey businesses to do more work because they're not so restricted to just Jersey. They can now more easily work around the world. But it does potentially have a tax implication, especially if we see employees, not working here, but working somewhere else. I think there is a piece of work. I was aware of that piece of work. I don't know how it's progressing. Again, Tom, I think it's a Treasury piece of work.
Yeah, I think from a corporate perspective, I mean, many of our financial professional services firms already outsource work within their broader networks because there are some cheaper locations for certain activities to be performed than in Jersey, or where they may have a group level centre of excellence for certain activities as well. But provided the tax base remains back here, so the work is ultimately billed from here and the profits accrued here, we still have taxing rights on that at a business level. I think we get into things that sort of digital nomads and so on, so people working more on a freelance basis from, say, the UK or France for a Jersey business. That becomes much more difficult because that personal level taxation is very much based around where you are resident ordinarily rather than who you are working for. So we wouldn't necessarily have those personal taxing rights. I think it's something that with the way the global economy is changing, tax authorities generally are going to have to get to grips with this. But there is also an opportunity for Jersey to draw people here to be working and living in Jersey, but perhaps performing functions for businesses elsewhere. because we do have a very attractive, living environment and business environment for people to come and do that. But that does need to be very carefully targeted to ensure that there is a real discernible benefit for Jersey in hosting those individuals.
I mean, which of those do you think is the most likely scenario? Having people living abroad working in Jersey, either remotely or coming here periodically, or the other way around, having what you've just described?
I certainly the way it sits today with the current sort of construct of global tax systems is to have the individuals resident here, because we then have the personal taxing rights here on those individuals. And because of the nature of Jersey's tax system, we have very few double taxation avoidance agreements globally. So the opportunity to offset tax by having people based somewhere else and working for Jersey is actually quite limited. So having people here performing roles and being sort of paid well to do that because of the nature of their work, provided that's accretive to Jersey overall, because it adds pressure to housing and it adds demand elsewhere in the economy, you have to be convinced of the economic case for that to work. So that's the kind of analysis that we would do.
Very quickly, I think for existing businesses, for islanders who either have their own businesses or are setting up their own business, I think it does create opportunity. I know when I worked, and also because Jersey is primarily a service economy, and so it is easier to provide services from Jersey to a company somewhere else in the world. You don't have to serve them dinner. If you're working as a waiter, you can't serve dinner the other side of the world. And so Jersey is primarily a service economy, so we do have those opportunities. Myself, before I became a States member, I was working for myself. I had clients outside of Jersey. I met someone just this week, a young gentleman who set up a consulting firm in the last few months, and he was telling me that of his new clients, he's got 3 of them who are outside of the island. So I think there is genuine opportunity, and I think that will happen. I think it may be more difficult to attract people to live in Jersey. It may not. It's only time will tell. But I think, and also obviously housing supply issues may put people off, or price of housing. But I think for people who are already here, I think they will continue. If they're offering services in that sort of way, I think they will continue to get clients outside of Jersey.
And to remind us, I mean, this is purely from a hard-nosed economic point of view. What does somebody need to earn to make it worthwhile for Jersey's government for them to be here? So
I think the calculation was done a number of years ago, and I think it's sort of around about 40 to 50,000 at that point.
that a single person that pays the tax they need to.
Yeah, I think there's some published work during the term of Chief Minister Lafondre that looked at different family circumstances, personal circumstances, single couples, couples with families and so on. And it broke it down in terms of what a break-even point would be. I'm sure that's in the public domain.
Is that reflected in what's come forward from the Controlled Housing and Work, the new...
It
the,
was, that
the
was
revised.
built, that was built into all the work that was done. I know we haven't redone that piece of work, but that sort of basis was built into everything that has been coming out recently, and the piece of work about whether or not you would transfer labour away from the island or bring it in.
Yeah, thank you. So specifically now on the Future Economy Programme, Minister, can you give us an update on the progress of the programme?
Yeah, so the programme informs pretty much everything that we do in our department and continues to do that. It informs a great deal happening outside our department as well. I think there is still, a long way to go on the productivity side. At the end of the day, we have to, I still remember Tom telling me some years ago, we're talking levels of productivity increases that we haven't seen since the Industrial Revolution, that sort of level. So we have a long way to go to meet the kind of productivity levels we need to sustain the ageing population that we have. That's where technology does play an enormous part. I do think we need to accelerate the adoption of technology by businesses in Jersey. I am less fearful of it taking jobs. I think in the main, artificial intelligence type technologies help you work in your job more efficiently and do free you up, particularly within the service economy, do free you up to focus on the kind of creative part whilst letting the machine do the mundane process work. But I do feel like Jersey's still got a relatively low technological adoption rate within the economy. Some businesses are absolutely at the top and they're flying as far as technology is concerned, but I think there's still several which have not got to where they need to go. I think we have maintained you know, in the face of a world which is becoming very nativist around the world, we see this, you know, in Europe, in America, etc., very kind of prohibitive to the outside world. I think we've maintained a narrative which is vital for Jersey, that Jersey's got an international economy, and we have to be an international facing island, and that we do need immigration into Jersey. That does cause cultural and social issues, and we need to manage those. But I think there is still an understanding in Jersey, or there is perhaps an even greater understanding in Jersey, that if we are to succeed as the rest of the world closes down, Jersey needs to open up in order to maintain its competitive advantage.
Can I ask, so I don't know if you're aware of the Joel's survey, or the Joel survey, as I should call it. It shows that when households were asked about affordability of living in Jersey, the real shift has come from 2017 to the last 2 years. So there's been very little change between 23 and 25. Some change, not necessarily for the better, but largely it's the same. But the big jump is that people are finding it much more difficult to afford things, cost of living, since 2017. How does that factor into your considerations around the future economy program?
Hugely. And it's, and again, I'm happy for Tom to step in at some point. It's one of the, it's almost one of the difficult, it is one of the huge difficulties in economic policy in that, especially as we've moved to a service-based economy, services tend to pay higher in the main. Certainly financial services pay very well. That means that we have had a wage base which has increased significantly, particularly since 2017. That drives inflation in the island. It's really simple. And of course, one of the ways we've helped mitigate, you know, one industry driving wages and other industries finding it tough to keep up with that, is we have done things like move to living wage and things like this, but there are impacts to doing that, and they are inflationary impacts. So that's within the island. I think it is difficult for us to kind of mitigate the impact of higher wages on inflation. So we have become a high wage environment. That's a reality. I think
we're talking about high, low wages, though, aren't we? That's what we're really talking about.
Well, across the board, no. In some areas you're talking high wages. In some areas you're talking high, low wages. I agree. When we talk about the living wage, we are talking high, low wages, as I understand you. But that has impacts. We obviously have a tax system which doesn't tax people huge amounts, and we have used the tax system to help people cope with the cost of living by pushing up the tax thresholds. But again, that does have inflationary impacts. So I think this is always a juggle for Jersey. And also, the majority, I believe, of inflationary pressures, but in terms of everyday goods, are from outside. The price of food across Europe and the UK has shot up since 2020. It's absolutely shot up. We import those prices, there's no question. I think housing, as I said earlier, we have turned the corner. The latest, and this comes because Tom told me, because I haven't read it yet, so I can't admit, but today the house price index came out. We're talking, you said 15%.
So 15% since its peak, it's fallen another 1% year on year, both in terms of house prices to buy and 1% on private rental sector.
Has gone down by 1%. And so we are turning the corner on housing. It has long been said, in fact, for the past 4 years, whilst I've been in government, that the cost of housing is driving people out of the island. Wages are catching up with that, and particularly as the price of housing does come down. There are other impacts, as I said. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the other impact is the policy choices we've made have made it harder for the construction sector to put spades in the ground to start projects. And so now we need to rebalance that, I would suggest. But the focus, I think, I have a funny feeling in the election and going into the next government, there's going to be, I think, a really strong focus on the cost of living, because I think that is something that people find.
Is it also not to do with just the way wealth is distributed? What we're seeing in the survey is that, for example, people who have to do without a car because they can't afford it, not just out of choice, it went from 5% to over, I'm looking, it's about 12% in this last year. Similar things for not going on holiday, that's shot up. not even being able to buy fresh fruits, not eating chicken, fish every second day, etc. But those are all
The basics, aren't they?
those are basics. So, is there a wider economic problem here which isn't just captured by, I don't know, housing or productivity growth?
If I could look across the pond to the USA briefly, just to try to put it in context. One of the things that I found fascinating about the US president's drive to bring back manufacturing to America was that manufacturing in large left America because America had become a highly developed economy and therefore its wages had moved up and they could move manufacturing bases elsewhere. I think there is an analogy there with Jersey. And as I said earlier, we have a particularly strong financial services industry, which does pay significantly higher wages than pretty much all other industries in Jersey. I think that does cause inflationary impacts, both on wages and then goods, which are difficult for us to control. And so in that sense, I do get concerned about Jersey having, different levels in its economy. I'm speaking from a non-economist perspective, but I don't know if Tom would agree with that.
Could this be called distortion, or is it?
So I think there's a number of different reasons, and it can get very complex in terms of we could probably do 2 or 3 sessions just on this. I think globally we've come through a significant inflationary period for a number of reasons. Largely a perfect storm of significant asset buying increases through quantitative easing and at the same time a pent-up demand from COVID. So they hit together effectively at the same time. I think we're also in a inflationary period now where we've been in a deflationary period for 20 years caused by high levels of economic migration, optimization of supply chains through globalization, increased growth in China as the world's sort of factory almost, quite significant stability to invest in primary goods as well. All those things have come to an end now. So those deflationary pressures have been removed, which means we are entering a period of inflationary pressure. Housing is still the crux of the issue on the island. It's very good that this has started to correct. I know there are some negative consequences as well, but it's very good that that started to correct. But at the same time, that correction has been because of interest rates going up, effectively, and that's actually costing households more than they were paying 3 or 4 years ago. So that's another whammy that our islands have been hit. So undoubtedly, this has been a problem for a number of years that's been growing. It is good, and the Joel does say that the issue is stabilising somewhat, and inflation is now stabilising on the island. I think what has happened in the last few years is we've woken up to the dangers and evil of inflation once again. And I think actually we'd forgotten how bad that is from the 70s and 80s, and making sure that we have that as part of our ongoing economic strategy of doing what we can on the island to keep inflation as limited as possible, even though those tools are somewhat limited, is something that we do need to do. Increasing productivity is one of those things that increases inflation. Decreasing and removing regulation, as we've talked about 3 or 4 items ago, is one of those things that can keep a lid on inflation. Reducing the size of government is really important in terms of those elements as well. So these are things that are being worked on and being discussed. So in the next term, whatever happens, hopefully the foundations have been put in place through the thinking to enable that lid on inflation being kept in, which means that the cost of living will at least stabilise, if not necessarily come down.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Not from me, no.
Minister, can we talk, we're probably moving into the last 10 minutes of our hearing with you. So could you talk to us, I suppose, about the areas outside of financial services which you would like to see growth in the economy? So the 2 sections, I suppose, are really about agriculture and fisheries, so we'll start with that, and then if we have time, maybe you can also talk to us about retail and hospitality. We may not get through all of them, so let's...
maybe briefly arts, culture and heritage as well, just because I think arts is, I can state it, I think I have a vision.
Okay. We'll talk to us generally.
Arts and culture becomes a sector in the economy,
yeah.
if you know what I mean.
Do you want to talk to us generally about what you think the areas are for growth or investment?
Well, so I spoke earlier about medtech. I think this is a high value industry which we can capture, that businesses have not just indicated they've actually moved here because they see Jersey having a role to play here, but we need to close that loop by getting the regulation in place to enable them. So that
what competitive advantage has Jersey got in this area that it could offer?
I think it's a geographic advantage, both Europe and the UK, connectivity. and I'm sure there are taxation advantages as well. But there's also the biggest advantage that I've heard when speaking to these businesses is the regulatory advantage, the nimbleness around regulation. My concern is that we're not being nimble enough around that regulation, and we need to act faster on that. So that's one area. I think if we talk to tourism, I think we've come through challenging years in tourism, not just 2025, but 2024. Actually, I'll wrap retail into that as well. I am really optimistic about not just the year ahead, but going forward. I think we need to maintain levels. So again, another thing I would say to a new minister is, we need to try to make sure that Visit Jersey's budget does stay at the new level. The £2 million from the business support scheme, think needs to become part of that level. I think Visit Jersey's changed its approach this year, and I think it's a much better approach, which will be more effective, and it's very much about converting.
Are there any target markets with Visit Jersey?
Yeah, Visit Jersey. Principal target markets are the UK, of course, France.
New ones, or
the USA does appear now. I think we are seeing the potential for that, but the principal target markets will remain the UK, France, Central Europe, and Northern Europe. They are markets which like Jersey, and they will remain the principal markets. But there is a
what's the tagline for advertising in the USA for?
I don't know.
Come to Jersey, you won't be arrested, or something.
I don't know.
There's got to be some possibilities.
We've got the same name as you, so it feels familiar. I think we need to maintain that focus. Hospitality and retail, they make life in interesting Jersey for islanders. They make life in Jersey interesting for islanders, and I think that's really important. So the ability to have a vibrant high street where you've got shops that you want to go to serves islanders as much as it serves tourists. But it's the tourist part of it which enables islanders to have that choice, because if we didn't have the tourists, the retailers wouldn't be able to operate the same way. The connectivity that comes from that is absolutely vital. I would like to see Jersey continue to increase our connectivity. Really pleased that we're going to have the KLM flights to Schiphol starting in April, and I believe that about half those seats have already been sold to holiday companies, which I think is really good. So that's a great start for the potential sustainability of that. I think we're going to have announcements coming up soon about other European connectivity, which I think will be really good, but I can't preempt those announcements. I do believe that regional connectivity, so La Manche and Inter-Island, etc., but particularly the regional connectivity to France and La Manche, I do believe that needs public funding. And I personally would never shy away from public funding that, because I think the connectivity benefits
do we need
are
to
much greater.
Do we need to publicly fund links to Guernsey then?
I think it could be something that we need to do, because the volumes on there are not big. And the historical volumes, so not just last year or whatever, but going back before COVID, they're not high volumes. And so I think that is something that we quite possibly should be looking at, if you know what I mean, to make sure that we have that sustainable thing.
And would that be funding a new vessel or a new company, or funding?
Well, at the moment, obviously, we have Islands Unlimited as a new company on there. They were funded last year by Guernsey. Obviously, the FDS will hopefully Guernsey will accept their proposals, so we'd have that. And we've got we've got the Aurigny, We've got the Aurigny connectivity as well, which ultimately is underwritten by the Guernsey government as well. So I think you could argue that actually a large part of that Inter-Island is already publicly supported.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to Granville, all those other, Carteret, etc., I just think we have to fund those. I think it'd be wrong for Jersey to lose those connections.
Yeah, co-fund.
Co-fund, yeah, and we are. And I just think, we're going to have to invest in new ferries. The Morel Express ferry at the moment does need replacing. So I think there's a conversation for Jersey to have with its counterparts, Guernsey and La Manche, about funding development of new ferries in that area. Because, again, I think we can increase numbers, but I think the numbers last year or the year before were about 16,000 passengers. So you're not talking enormous amounts, which makes it difficult to run a full ferry service without public support. And in fact, La Manche have been publicly supporting that service since the year 2000.
Sure. Minister, can I just move us quickly on to the agricultural loans law P37? So in your letter to us, you said that you'll be looking to extend the eligibility for agricultural loan scheme to the fishing businesses. Can you give us some detail on that?
Yes, so the proposed law change does extend it to the marine economy as well as the rural economy. Like the rural economy, the marine economy, so fishing, I'll say fishing and farming is easier. Fishing is capital intensive. You know, you need a vessel at the end of the day, they cost. It's difficult. Like farming we have succession problems. There are people not, you know, the high capital cost of a new vessel, equipping it to the right standards, etc., is putting people off coming into the industry. There's no question. And obviously there are then challenges in the industry itself about catches and so on. So I think it's right. You know, I would like Jersey to maintain a fishing economy. I think, therefore, because of that capital cost of getting into fishing, I think it's right. You know, the private sector will not fund that sort of lending. So I think it's right that we wrap them into the agricultural loan scheme to enable them to get kind of low cost capital to enable them to start up or maintain their vessels.
Are fishers at the moment able to also apply for the Better Business Support Package? Are they?
Yes.
They are, but only if it suits them.
Yes. I'd also say, sorry, it's not just the vessels. Another important part is around agricultural loans is, you know, capital cost that on the land element of fishing. So, you know, storage, you know, blast freezing for octopuses, things like this. It's like there is a capital cost there, and I think it's important when the industry has so many challenges that the government does provide that cheaper cost of capital.
Is the processing plant for fishing, is that still on the cards? That's been called for by some.
So I think it's still something we need to explore. I think this is somewhere where we could talk to France actually about co-investment possibly as well, which might then actually enable us to work more easily at the ports, if you know what I mean. So I think there's a conversation that can be done there. I do believe there is some investment going into, I just mentioned blast freezers. That is, in a sense, part of that processing. It isn't for processing, it's for maintaining this catch, in this case octopus, in order to be able to get it to market. But I think there is work being done there where capital is being helped by government to enable that to take place.
Are we seeing an emerging market in octopus? Is it increasing?
Certainly the number of octopus is increasing. I don't know so much about the market. I know we've seen stories about the UK market going very well. There's definitely a European market, but at the moment we have a lack of facilities to enable us to access that market, and we have enough octopus to make it worthwhile doing them.
Are we seeing more octopus being caught, you know? How do you feel about that?
Tough. As in, I like octopus. I think it's an amazing creature. But I do know as well that they're having, you know, they are eating the other catchers. They are really creating challenges in other areas, whether it's lobster, crab, scallops, etc. They are having an impact there as well.
Yeah. And will you be supporting the changes that are coming forward on Atlantic bluefin tuna? Is that something that's potentially good for the economy?
It certainly would be good for the economy. I think it always needs to be monitored. I, like others, I'm sure you guys as well, it's like, I love the marine environment. I'm a scuba diver. I love the marine environment. But I do know that it's also very difficult when you know that fishermen from France are catching tuna, that our fishermen sit there kind of watching these economic potential go past, literally. So I think it is right to open up that fishery, but it needs to be very limited and it needs to be monitored extremely closely.
Any questions? Minister, have you got any final remarks? We've got a couple of minutes if you want.
I'd like to thank you for the scrutiny over the past couple of years. Thank you very much. I think comments. I like to think that over the past 4 years, we've helped Jersey look into the future about the economy and start to take a longer-term view of the economy. I think that's vital, and I would ask any future ministers to maintain that long-term view of the economy. But there is clearly a friction between long-term success and short-term wants and needs and impacts. And I think that's one of for any economic development minister, I think one of the toughest things that is going to be for them will be maintaining that. You've got to keep looking long, because that's where the real challenges lie. But every change you make for the long term can have that short-term impact, which creates today's headlines, which makes today very difficult to live, even though you know you're doing the right thing for the long term.
Thank you. Well, look, from our part, I mean, we've not finished. Yeah.
Apologies. I'd really like to thank all my team, both here today, but also in the office. For 4 years, I've worked with an amazing team. We're not a big department, but the amount of work we've got through, I think, is possibly the largest amount of work, COVID aside, that any economic development minister has got through in their 4 years, and I really thank all of them for that.
Yeah. So look, this isn't the last necessary time we'll see each other. We've still got 2 months of scrutiny to do, but it's the last quarter hearing. So thank you for attending on us so often when you've been asked to do that, and your panel. And we've certainly, I think, enjoyed scrutinising what's been a very varied portfolio with lots of legislation coming through. So if you're happy with that, we'll call an end to this hearing and